So I remembered Field you sent to me, and then you also sent several drafts with it too. We'll get to that aspect of it in a bit, although I won't talk in too much detail in the drafts. But I thought this was one of your better plays that I've read. The character Susanna Hoffs, who's basically in this girl brand called, I don't know if it's a fictional girl brand or not, I didn't bother looking it up. But that I found very interesting. Just how the play is almost, except for towards the end, a never-ending argument between its parties. And then it eventually leads into some reconciliation between Rosanna and her band girl mates, as well as a few other interesting tidbits and some moments that are, even though they're filled with some angst and drama, they also have some tenderness to them. So they're very complex, dramatic moments in between everything.
Well, the band and the main character were based on a singer named Susanna Hoffs and the 80s girl group called the Bangles, who did like Manic Monday, probably their biggest hits, or Walk Like an Egyptian. And I was hoping to do a play perhaps about Susanna Hoffs, because I had seen several months ago one of these like online bios that probably from the late 90s or early O's about the Bangles, and I was like, oh, I remember they were the best, probably the best girl band, and Susanna Hoffs was this cute, petite, brunette little Jewish gal, and I remember thinking, man, she was so hot, and I thought, well, maybe I could interview her about music or whatnot, and I tried several times to contact her website and her agency, but I never got a response. So I said, well, like I did with the play Exteriors, I basically had the idea for the woman dying of Alzheimer's and it being a black family, and the way to get Danny Wagner in there was, I thought, the best way was to make a former lover of Danny's that he had a 1 or 2 night stand with 30 years ago when he went to a writer's forum, instead of being a white girl, make it a black girl, and then this black girl turns out to be the main character of the play. Well, in a similar way, I said, well, let's combine when I used to go into Brooklyn, into the underground art scene, where you'd have, third-rate Andy Warhol types showing their art films, and you'd have bands playing and bad artists generally fucking around. That let's make one of the girls that I might have had a one-night stand with there, and instead of just being some unmemorable thing, one of them turns out to have actually had some financial success and turns out to be this Susanna Hoffs clone called Rosanna Hobbs. And so she has a band called the Boo Boos rather than the Bangles, which is sort of like the Go-Go's, which is another girl band, but I call them the Boo Boos. And I looked at some of the key points from this documentary about how Susanna Hoffs wanted to become a rock star after John Lennon was shot, and how the band had their heyday. They had their, internal strife, just like many rock bands do. And then that she's now single because her husband has died after some embezzlement scandal or this or that, and she somehow stumbles across Danny Wagner and his website online. She contacts him. They get back in contact, emailing. She wants him to be the guy who sort of ghostwrites her biography as she's planning a comeback, 20 years, 25 years after she was in her heyday. And Danny doesn't want to do it, but he wants to interview her like he did the Mel character for A Woman of No Consequence for one of his Biorama series. And so those are the two threads. In the past, we get her husband and the bandmates and the management and her rock star stuff. And then in the present, we get her conversations with Danny Wagner about life and where they were and that kind of thing. And it ends up, the play you had mentioned in an email, I think, or something about the ending of the play. And the ending of the play, to me, is very much like The King of Comedy. If you remember the end of The King of Comedy. It wasn't the end of The King of Comedy. Well, yeah, it was. That could be in his head. But there's that scene where the first time we see De Niro, he's talking, and it turns out he's got big cardboard things of an audience watching, and then his mother yells down, and so you get this echo chamber within his head, and so it's not particularly clear whether Rosanna Hobbs reclaims her fame. It's said by the so-called nighttime interview host that appears in the last scene that she's now dating Brad Pitt, and she's had a big comeback album kind of thing, and Danny Wagner is still like me, just has his website and is struggling to get along, and she's not contacting him as much. Which, if you go back to that play, A Woman of No Consequence, there it ends with Danny getting the interview with the lonely woman, and he's not gonna, once he's got that, they're not gonna really be in touch. So maybe is Danny Wagner using her? In this play, it's the reverse. Is Rosanna Hobbs using Danny? And when he doesn't want to do her thing, she sort of moves on, and and they're not in contact.
We also find out something about the main character from A Woman of No Consequence too, where it's followed up in this play, where you had broken essentially most contact with her, except she emails you once a week. Still dealing with that, and that she didn't like how the interview turned out afterwards.
Oh, the Woman of No Consequence?
Yes.
Yeah. And that's one of the things with some other plays, I think I mentioned earlier how in my fourth play, Exteriors, there's a phone call between Danny Wagner and the black woman who's his former lover, the Cassie character. And it turns out, in time-wise, that phone call comes like right before he makes the phone call in the first play to Megan Morrow. So there are all these kinds of little interconnections in all of these plays, and these little things that come back and forth. But I think the Rosanna Hobbs character is an interesting character. I think she's a realistic character. In a sense, she's a more glamorous version of the character you mentioned, the main character, a female character in Theodore. In that, okay, Kiwi, you want to come back? She's an artist, and she wants to be quiet, and she wants to come back. I love you, and she wants to come back, and whoops, what was I saying?
Kiwi's throwing you off.
Yeah. You're going to have to shut the door and put you out if you keep it up. Okay, we're right here. But anyway, so the character of Roseanne, I think, is a more complex version of some of the other artistic kind of characters. And we get that she has some talent, but ultimately she's just a pop star. And it. I think it was a good way, and it's a long play, and you're able to get into some depth. It's a play that I think harkens back to the first two plays that I wrote in terms of not being so much about Danny Wagner, and especially with the ending with her sort of either in her mind getting back her mojo, or maybe really getting it, and which is the worst ending, that she's really a shallow person that's satisfied by this, or that she's somehow frustrated and just imagining it. So
yeah, there's an artifice to the ending that relates to the King comedy, but like the King comedy's ending, it's not so far away from reality that you can't accept it as her natural end. And the thing that I had mentioned to you in the email is that in the penultimate scene, you refer to a bunch of dark twists on art. The Tennessee Williams scene in A Streetcar Named Desire, where the rape is clearly more of a seduction than it is a rape as written. But as performed, they almost always perform as rape. You can also get into a lot of how comic books nowadays are almost always interpreted in the darkest possible manner instead of what they really are, which is comic books. I think that the ending there, too, leads nicely into the proper end, where you get a very dark and twisted take of what this could be in store for this character, but at the same time there's the lighter overtones that you have to read into as well. that this could be a move forward for her, at least financially, and maybe get her out of some of her doldrums that she had prior to.
Well, it's also set a few years when the rest of the play is set in 2017.
Well, that's a question, though, whether
Yeah.
it's really in 2020 or not.